We can't stand by when hate rears its head. We murdered 5,000 children last month.
Welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I do the podcasty bits. I'm Murray McElhone, and I'm with a very avid amateur and fan of politics and author, Robert Morris.
Hey, Rory, how's it going?
I'm just very worried. I've been reading a article from a young whippersnapper. He must write for the Washington Post. I don't think he doesn't seem to have a lot of power over the world. He's just talking about the threats we face, and I'm worried that I might have to start learning Mandarin pretty soon. Have you read this article?
Oh, I know.
From a Brandon, is it?
Yeah, it's really intriguing, just the geopolitical analysis of this guy who, it seems, it honestly, reading this, it seems like it's not actually someone who's got a real job with the Washington Post. It's perhaps like an intern, because honestly, the understanding of geopolitics that's exhibited here is honestly, I think it's not a particularly smart teenager that
but
had
it's
to
nice
have
that they
written
let
this.
them have like a crack at it. They can put it on the CV and stuff.
Yeah, that's important. Today we're going to be talking about an opinion piece written in the Washington Post by a precocious young lad named Joe Biden, talking about how the U.S. won't back down from the challenge of Putin and Hamas.
Because they're very similar.
They're the same thing,
one of the
really.
largest armies in the world, and the other one, which doesn't seem to have any traditional army as such.
Well, they've got some tunnels, Rory, and you've got to understand that's very, very scary.
It is very scary.
Yeah.
Especially if they're in an open prison, because that's generally where tunnels are dug, is in prisons.
Joking aside, Rory, I think that this opinion piece that Biden has blessed us with, this is dated November 18th, 2023, has sort of helped me solidify something that I've said in a couple other venues at this point. But Joe Biden's got to go. I think on this podcast we've talked about having some affection for Brandon and some certainly appreciation for what he did in Afghanistan, and honestly for some of his Ukraine leadership as well. But the past month has really just shown that this guy was running on fumes, and the fumes that he's running on are dangerous and really troubling 20th century fumes that are making things significantly worse in the Middle East right now. And this disaster of an article that we're going to go through just really emphasizes how he is completely unequal to the moment that we find ourselves in. And I think it's important, and perhaps we get into the article. I think what this means practically is obviously not that we need a Republican for president, because that would be, as we've seen at every moment that a Republican has been allowed into office this century, what we've gotten are horrific catastrophes. In the next episode, we're going to talk a bit about the U.S. budget deficit and national debt, and it's really quite straightforward. It's like Republicans get into office, start spending like drunken sailors, and create catastrophes that necessitate an obscene level of spending at the beginning of a Democratic administration, and then that Democratic administration spends its entire time in power trying desperately to bring the amount of money spent down, and then a Republican comes back in, jacks up spending immediately, and then ends with a horrific crisis. So obviously Republicans aren't the answer.
But they're spending a lot on social programs, so at least the average Joe benefits from all this spending.
Actually, I know that's intended as a joke, but honestly, Donald Trump's COVID-era spending that spilled over into the Biden administration's COVID-era spending was, some of that, a lot of that was actually, a lot of it was handouts to the wealthy and large corporations, but also a lot of it did do really valuable social spending. Of course, the Bush administration did absolutely none of that. That was we're going to bail out the banks, we're going to let everybody suffer. And actually, Trump and Biden are to be commended with this sort of crisis. They did less of that, and actually, did spread the wealth around a little bit more. But the fact is that Republicans mean horrific crisis, which means that we need a high class of Democrat to come in and fix things after every time some Republican is allowed to roll into office. And Joe Biden is really demonstrating really, really clearly that he is not that guy. He's just not that guy. So what that means
Will you
is
give him credit for sort of helping the economy? Because it seems to be for most people, things are going okay.
I mean, sure. And I think the problems of the economy are hard to blame on him. There was, because of the level of spending, because of what happened to supply chains, because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, inflation was going to happen. I think that to some extent, Biden, to a larger extent, the Federal Reserve have taken the steps necessary to sort of stop that inflation. I think Biden has done some interesting things domestically, but the incapacity demonstrated by what he's been up to since Hamas's attack on Israel and the just ancient, outmoded framework through which he's viewing this conflict, and the frankly outrageous attempts he's making to sort of knit this into a broader philosophy. If he believes it, it's insane. And if it's just his half-assed attempt to swindle the American people, or the half-assed attempt of the people advising him to swindle the American people, either way, whether they believe it or not, it is utterly outrageous and just can't be countenanced. So we need a better Democrat. And we've got about 11 months until the 2024 U.S. election. So it's real important that we deal with this now. I think from what I'm seeing, footage of Biden, he looks like he's visibly declining. And we're going to get to June, and he's going to look like some kind of reanimated corpse. And really, at that point in June, it will be too late. And Biden's the horse we have to ride into the election. But we've still got a year. I think I meant to look it up, but I think LBJ, the progressive hero president who martyred his presidency on Vietnam, gave up in, I think, January or somewhere at some point in the spring of an election year. So we've still got time. We've just got to start talking about it seriously. It's time to replace Joe Biden.
Who would you ideally replace him with?
I don't care. Unlike the Republicans,
is it unnamed candidate tends to do very well in these opinion polls?
Indeed. And of course, opinion polls, we should mention that on the generic ballot, or not generic ballot, Biden is losing to every plausible Republican candidate. He's losing by slim margins to Trump, but he's losing by really wide margins to Nikki Haley, who is a terrifying psychopath, as with all Republicans. So I don't want to seem misogynist by focusing on Nikki Haley in particular, but Nikki Haley is someone who's never worked for anybody other than a defense contractor when she's been outside of government.
Is there something worrying that, at least with Trump, we know what we're going to get, while with the other ones, they could be much worse?
I think that there's aspects of Trump that are guaranteed to be worse than any other Republican. But I think the long-term damage that some other Republican could do is, I think, potentially much stronger. I think a Nikki Haley could come in, and she is, I think, somewhat politically savvy. She is much more palatable. She talks like a president or something like that. And unfortunately, her politics, her agenda, is essentially resurrected George W. Bush. So I think Nikki Haley could potentially come in, be this very popular, supposedly unifying figure that we all love again, and she is going to bring us all together by starting our next $1 trillion war in the Middle East, which I think would be long-term incredibly damaging and incredibly stupid. But she wouldn't be as initially panic-inducing as, say, a Trump presidency would be. So essentially, any Republican option, Rory, is pretty nightmarish as far as I'm concerned. So we need to now, let them debate. Like, why don't we have a what's the word? Like, just a safety debate. Biden doesn't even have to drop out. Let's just put all of these very charismatic, some of them quite young, Democratic governors. Andy Beshear he's younger than I am, which is really a disappointing thing to see. It's a sign of age or what have you. This guy who's a Democratic guy who won in a red state, Gretchen Whitmer, Democratic governor of a purple state, Michigan. who's largely considered seen as a big success. Gavin Newsom is a little too much of an obvious choice. I think people think he's a little sleazy, and he's so clearly been sort of gearing himself to be president for a very, very long time. But, that's a plausible option. Shapiro in Pennsylvania. The Democrats, unlike the Republicans, have a very deep bench of interesting, plausible presidential candidates. And really, Biden is just standing in the way. And he should stop. I really do think that this nightmare that's unfolding in Israel-Palestine right now is just so fundamentally disqualifying to him and his failure to meet the moment. That perhaps it would be good if Biden could sort of stay in as president, do a number of things that really, really have to happen, like increase taxes, figure out some kind of more sustainable approach to Ukraine, do politically unpopular things, and then we can have like a nice young Democrat come in and maybe finally start sorting out some of these massive long-term problems of the country. Because if we just hold on to Biden, if we just hold on to good old Genocide Joe, we're gonna end up with another Republican president and another catastrophe, because that's what Republican presidents do.
Would you like to read the first paragraph? Because I think it pretty much sets up the whole article.
Today, the world faces an inflection point where the choices we make, including the crises in Europe and the Middle East, will determine the direction of our future for generations to come. On one level, this is correct. We can continue to make terrible choices in foreign policy, but this is an inflection point that has really been the case. Every year is an inflection point since 2001. We've had the opportunity to make better choices. Joe Biden's choice at this particular inflection point is to keep on making bad choices. There's zero indication anywhere in this article that there might be some kind of issue with the U.S.'s constant insertion of itself into conflicts. And I would go further than that and say creation of conflicts. And this just sort of deeply, the title of this is Joe Biden. The U.S. won't back down from the challenge of Putin and Hamas. This is not.
Well, one has like one of the longest like front lines since World War II, and the other one just seems to be bombing a hospital. It's hard to see the parallels.
Yeah, it is. Hamas is a disgusting little organization that was able to carry out one of the worst terror attacks in living memory because the Israeli government took its eye off the ball. Hamas is fundamentally a bunch of Israeli citizens. The Palestinians of Gaza are a bunch of Israeli citizens. What we are witnessing, what we are heavily funding, is a murderous police action by the Israeli government against a bunch of Israeli citizens. It's monstrous and it is evil. Hamas is a gross little organization, but to put them on the same level as Putin is to facilitate this monstrous series of Israeli actions against these Palestinians that are Israeli citizens. So it is a absurd formulation, but that's where he starts at the headline.
Is it health ID numbers they all have? Like every Palestinian civilian gets, these sort of ID numbers, and that's how they're able to, say, identify the dead? I
believe so. I haven't looked through the intricacies of that, but it was quite stunning that when the Gaza Health Authority wanted to counter Joe Biden's truly disgusting impugning of the body count, saying, "Oh, well, these guys must be lying about it." They put forward an exhaustive list of all the people that had been killed at that point that included ID numbers given by the Israeli government, which I think was sort of a moment of sort of clarity or teachable moment that we all should have paid a little bit more attention to. But the world facing an inflection point. This is another opportunity to sort of step back and say, wow, we're insanely over-involved in all of these places. And Biden's reaction to that is to concoct this absurd genocide tempting rationale. This is much like I did a produced video a week or so back where I compared this to the Axis of Evil speech. This is like the Axis of Evil speech that famously mocked strategic abortion that George W. Bush rolled out. But honestly, it's more obscene in its neglect and nastiness about human life. Will we deny Hamas the ability to carry out pure, unadulterated evil? It's just like, yes, Hamas is a terrible, terrible organization, and we didn't deny Hamas the opportunity to carry out pure, unadulterated evil. We provided that opportunity, as did the Netanyahu government. I've been having trouble, unsurprisingly, tracking down the exact numbers on this, but the reason why Hamas was able to steamroll its way across the Israeli border is because that border was obscenely neglected by the Netanyahu government that preferred to have dozens of Israeli battalions in the West Bank focusing on ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians who had tried to work with the Israelis for 20 years. It's funny, I don't want to, I'm going to sound like a border security guy, which is not my approach to the U.S. border for sure. But Hamas was on record saying we would like to kill as many Israelis as we possibly can. And the Netanyahu government's approach to that was like, oh, no, we got them handled. We make sure that Qatar sends them money so they won't really screw with us. They won't really follow through that. And yeah, we bomb them all the time just for fun. It's fine. We'll have a couple hundred Israeli troops and we've got robots with guns. It'll be fine. Like the true horror of October 7th, the true disaster here was neglect. Yes, but I'm not trying to make excuses for Hamas murderers. I think they were all, it's interesting what happened with the Israeli body counts. It's like, actually, no, the body counts were a little high. We mistook the 200 Hamas operatives that had been burned to death. I'm sure they died horribly, and I think they all deserve it. They're terrible, terrible people. I have no sympathy for the Hamas organization. But fundamentally, again, Hamas, they are Israeli citizens. The 2.2 million people in Gaza are Israeli citizens. There was a proposal of a two-state solution made 20-odd years ago. Every Israeli government, specifically this Israeli government, has done everything in its power to crush that solution. There is no two-state solution. There is one state with a population with rights, and there is a slave population. So what we're seeing right now is the systematic murder and dispossession of the slave population of Israel. That's what's going on right here. And that is what Biden is trying to defend by saying that if we stop the systematic murder of Israel's slave population, then we're going to be giving in to pure, unadulterated evil.
Who do you think this is for? Because I'm seeing a lot of parallels to Ukraine is essentially Israel. Is this to try and get over a lot of people that, aren't so keen on Ukraine but are 100% on board with Israel?
Yes, I think that, well, as I we'll get into this, like what the United States has been doing in Ukraine, not if you look into the history of it. If you look into the history of it, as we have, it's pretty clear that the United States did a lot to make this conflict happen. Putin's invasion is unforgivable, but the United States put a lot of circumstances in place that made.
I feel like you could describe it as America set a trap and Russia was stupid enough to fall for it. So it's still Russia's action to go for it and to gamble, but it's, America did do a lot of plotting along the way.
Exactly. I think that's a very good formulation. The United States set a trap. Putin was stupid enough to go and walk into it. But that doesn't change the fact that Putin walked into the trap. Putin made the choice for atrocity. Putin made the choice for mass evil and gave Washington, D.C. something it hasn't had in 20 years, which is a rationale, a truly justified, truly moral and ethical justification for action. So what Joe Biden is doing here is he's actually, I don't even think this is for the U.S. public. I think this is for the U.S. government. This op-ed is fundamentally about convincing people, even in Washington, D.C., because it'd be outside of Washington, D.C., I think in the United States, I think people largely are where they were oriented around Israel-Hamas conflict before October 7th. I think in the couple weeks after October 7th, there was much, much more support for Israel than there has been over the past decade. But as the horrors have continued to emerge, that has sort of gotten back to basics. What is a real problem for Joe Biden and the other guys running the Biden administration is that much of the U.S. government is beginning to rebel against this Israel policy. So what this op-ed is about is saying, no. You have to understand the Israel-Hamas thing. This is just an extension of the good stuff we're doing in Ukraine. Because Ukraine was great for morale at the State Department. It was great for morale across Washington, D.C. It's like a legitimately good thing that the U.S. government is doing. And I emphasize a lot on this channel that despite all of the evil things that the U.S. government does, the vast majority of the people who work there are not evil, and they really do believe they're doing good things and making the world better. And it is so apparent, like the absolute sea of bilge and social media nonsense that you have to be swimming in at this point to believe that Israel is doing anything other than committing horrific ethnic cleansing at this point is extreme. The U.S. State Department is structurally, fundamentally Israel biased and is about helping Israel and, helping Israel do things and sort of hemming and hawing about it and feeling kind of bad about it. But they do actually know what's going on in Israel and Palestine. So most people at the State Department, specifically younger people, are not stupid enough to believe the sea of propaganda bilge that the Israeli government and Israeli superfans are putting out at this point. And they can see how horrific this is. And there is large-scale rebellion that's been well documented, dissent cables, this, that, and the other thing. So I think, honestly, because I don't think Joe Biden could see this as persuasive to anybody who's at all knowledgeable about either of these conflicts. But I do think that he is hoping that this can be used to sort of, use his own charisma, such as it is, to sort of paper over cracks within his own government to sort of keep things rolling forward. But it is
but the other strange thing is Ukraine's not like a full ally while Israel is, so it's like you don't really, you can help Israel as much as you want because they're sort of as close to, I don't think they'll be a member of NATO, but they're as close to being one as possible, while Ukraine's still got that degree of separation. So it's being supported and supplied, but it's not a 100% ally. So it's interesting that this almost like fringe friend is getting this, it's like, it feels like they've accidentally gotten a just war when they're up to so much badness. So are they trying to wash this conflict with as much kindness and goodness that they're getting from Ukraine?
Exactly. I think that's exactly what Joe Biden's whole project here is, and it's contemptible. Because I talked about, there's this paragraph here which is honestly kind of heartbreaking because I believed this as a kid. I believed this in my 20s. And what was the great promise of the Ukraine conflict, what it gave us in March of 2022 was a real opportunity to do kind of what we did in the 1990s. We could have done like a real house cleaning. We could have actually lived up to this, like the United States is the essential nation. We rally allies and partners to stand up to aggressors and make progress towards a brighter, more peaceful future. The world looks to us to solve the problems of our time. That is the duty of leadership. And America will lead, for if we walk away from the challenges of today, the risk of conflict could spread and the costs to address them will only rise. We will not let that happen. Reading that in March of 2022 would be kind of magical because it was kind of true again. Like this self-delusion at the heart of most Americans who are patriotic about the United States was true for like a shining moment, and we could have backed that up by doing better things. And the problem is it's so heartrending and betraying to just see that beautiful idea which is now truly dead, just sort of shackled to this genocidal farce in Israel-Palestine. It is so damn sad. So that's very on point, Ray. That's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to sort of wash the filth of what's going on in Gaza right now with the barely remembered virtue of what's going on in Ukraine. Interestingly, at the same time as the U.S. government seems to be more and more clearly, and the foreign policy establishment more and more clearly is being like, sorry, Ukraine, we're not going to give you as many artillery shells as you need because we need them to blow up some schools in Gaza. And it is quite something. Will Israelis and Palestinians one day live side by side in peace with two states for two peoples? And the answer is no. And what we're doing now is certainly not going to contribute to that.
Is the two-state solution something America has ever pushed, or?
Sure. Everybody since Clinton, I guess, has talked about the two-state solution. And during even the Bush administration, had push things towards that. Of course, it was the Bush administration that gave Gaza to Hamas and sort of set up this situation that Netanyahu has taken advantage of ever since, where, of course, there's not going to be any two-state solution, where the second state, Palestine, has been divided into two states that fight each other. So we've been talking about the two-state solution for 25 years now. And it just gets further and further and further away. And that's one of the most pitiful aspects of this article is just Biden's...
But is that is America just saying it wants to do this when really it couldn't care less? Or has America done all it can to try and achieve the two-state solution? Or?
Oh, of course not. But I do think that a lot of people in the State Department, those not evil people in the State Department, tell themselves they're really serious about the two-state solution. They really believe that this is something that they've been working towards. It's nonsense, obviously. The two-state solution is utterly impossible when the Israelis are constantly acting to take more Palestinian territory, which is what they've been doing with settlements in the West Bank for the entirety of the 20 years we've been talking.
From what I understand, when you see the West Bank on maps, it looks like a large it almost just looks like Palestine sort of two separate entities. But in reality, it's more like an archipelago of islands. It's lots of little tiny settlements. So I don't know whether it would be 100 or so, all fragmented. So like the biggest settlement would be Gaza, the Gaza Strip.
So those are the settlement. There are no settlements in the Gaza Strip since 2005, and Israel likes to say, look, we set it free. They did not set for Gaza free. Gaza has no control over its borders. Gaza has been maintained in a state of siege for a decade and a half. And there's sort of two separate policies. The guys who advocate for firm resistance and refuse to acknowledge that Israel exists, we'll let those guys actually control territory. We'll keep them just on the edge of starvation. That's what they've been doing. They've kept Gaza as miserable as possible for 15 years, but not miserable enough that Hamas would lose power, because they like Hamas, because Hamas makes it certain, not Israel in general likes Hamas, the Netanyahu government that has been in power for much of the past 15 years likes Gaza, because Gaza makes a two-state solution impossible. The West Bank, the Palestinian group run by the Palestinian Authority, that grouping that has worked closely with Israel, has conceded Israel's right to exist for 20 years, has close security cooperation with the Israeli state. That's the place where their territories have just begun to look more and more like Swiss cheese, where they just have these little tiny islands within. So yeah, the two-state solution is not something that anybody's going to work towards. We have one state with a free population and a slave population, and the current Israeli government is mass murdering its slave population. And just this whole paragraph here where he's like, will we deny Hamas the ability to carry out this excuse for this mass murder of the slave population? And then to tack that onto a question, will Israelis and Palestinians one day live side by side in peace, is obscene. No,
But the wording of it almost makes it out like it's something you and me and all the readers can do if we band together, and this poor little writer has no power at all over the situation.
no.
It's so bizarre, but almost vulgar at times.
The obscene is the word that I keep coming back to over the past month or so. Obscenity. And then, of course, that parallelism you were talking about. Will we hold Vladimir Putin accountable for his aggression so the people of Ukraine can live free in Europe? Remains an anchor for global peace and security? Like it's just...
Well, isn't there already an international... Isn't there an arrest warrant for Putin at the moment?
Yeah.
If he leaves. So I feel like the international community's kind of done all they can, and if this war ends, he'll probably end up dead. Like, I think that die has been cast.
And let me be clear here. I don't want to pretend I'm some kind of like rah-rah, like Ukraine all the way guy. I actually think it's probably okay and not a bad thing that the Israel thing is prompting Washington, D.C. to start pressuring Ukraine to push for peace. That is actually, I think that's a good thing. But let's be clear, like he's writing this stuff about Vladimir Putin in a opinion piece in the context of a policy that is using Ukraine to whitewash, and he wants to use the virtue of Ukraine to whitewash what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and he wants to use that virtue and whitewashing as part of a process of abandoning Ukraine so he can divert more resources to blowing up schools and hospitals in Palestine. It's truly obscene is again the word that I get to. And the overarching question, will we relentlessly pursue our positive vision for the future? Or will we allow those who do not share our values to drag the world to a more dangerous and divided place? Like Bibi Netanyahu, the guy who is most responsible for the October 7th attacks, the guy who is gleefully mass murdering the Palestinian Israelis in Gaza, is the guy most responsible. And the reason Netanyahu is in charge in Israel, has been able to retain power for the past 15 years in Israel, is because of the United States. There are elements, it's very like blown out of proportion. I think Joe Biden personally doesn't much like Netanyahu. There are elements of the Democratic establishment that do not like Netanyahu. But the majority of the Democratic establishment, all of the Republican establishment, every defense company in the United States, which certainly holds more power in Washington, D.C., than the Republicans and the Democrat establishments altogether, has been whole hog for Netanyahu for 15 years. This is the guy who built this horror show that we are watching unfold in Israel and Palestine. And this idea that it was other people who dragged the world into a more dangerous or divided space. It was somebody else. Bibi Netanyahu is a paid-up member of the U.S. military-industrial complex, a bought and paid-for missile salesman. And this is what we created. This is not a more dangerous and divided place that somebody mean did to us. I remember on October 7th, I called a not usually very knowledgeable friend of mine in Washington, D.C., and he's like, look what Russia did to us. Russia, this is all Russia. And it's just like, nah, man, yeah, I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was some connection. Maybe some Hamas guys went to a training camp in Russia or something, but that hasn't been proven in any way. And you can be sure we'd hear a lot about it if it had been. But yeah, there's definitely, look what Russia did to us, which is just this desperate wish in Washington, D.C. To pin our own idiocies on anybody else. So yeah, we have dragged this to a dangerous and divided place. And yeah, again, on Ukraine, it's like what we are doing there is virtuous. It is great, but it's also because of a situation. It's a trap that we encourage Putin to walk into. So yeah, this idea that like, and if the United States had not decided to be over represented in Ukraine for decades, there would have been no war. So this idea that it's those who don't share our values who are dragging us to a dangerous place, and also just the pitifulness of the people we're looking at in Biden's axis of evil here. I mean, Russia is a shadow of what we thought it was 2.5 years ago. And Hamas is, again, a crappy little quasi-separatist government within our client state that is mostly responsible for the murder of probably 20,000 of its own sect at this point. It doesn't make me happy, Rory. Think I've made that clear. Both Putin and Hamas are fighting to wipe a neighboring democracy off the map. He's trotted this out in speeches before as well, and it's like, I guess that's technically true, but man, like, I think technically a bullet in your, I think technically a COVID virus and your neighbor coming at you with a machete have similar effects, but they are not the same thing, man.
No.
They are not the same thing. Both Putin and Hamas hope to collapse broader regional stability and integration and take advantage of the ensuing disorder. Like, who's responsible for disorder in the Middle East over the past 20 years? Is it Hamas? Is it Putin? Is it the USA? I think anybody listening to this podcast already has a pretty clear idea of who. So we read that really depressing paragraph about how the United States is the essential nation.
So they're basically, we rally allies, so every sort of NATO member has to be 100% hoorah for this.
Oh, yeah.
When wasn't it the president of France, which France has been very pro-Israel, and even he was like, can you please stop killing babies?
Yeah.
I thought it was an Onion article, and then it was like, oh no, that's actually what he said.
Yeah, please stop killing, please stop
women and children.
Please stop your mass murder of women and children that are, again, they're not like a foreign enemy population, one-state solution.
Well, Israelis that can't vote.
Yes, that can't vote, and that the Israeli government is trying to get rid of, and if they can't get rid of, murder. And that is a nonstop atrocity. And also it's just a broader moment, like this just sort of, I feel like this is kind of an emperor has no clothes moment. Everyone's like, well, what do you expect Israel to do? There's nothing else to do other than commit the largest recruitment drive for Hamas in human history.
Yeah, killing women and children's always a great recruitment.
Yeah, I saw a great TikTok that was like, yeah, man, like if, my premature baby was in a NICU and, an occupying government turned off the power and killed my premature baby, I would be a terrorist for the rest of my life. And that is a situation that has been created multiple times by Israel over the past month. They have been wiping out. I think this is a really key thing here, is like Israel's policy can 100% be successful at eradicating Hamas here if they eradicate the Palestinian people in Gaza. So the only circumstances under which this current policy that Israel is pursuing and that the Biden administration is saying just makes sense. The only plausible success case for this is genocide. So that might be to underline the seriousness of what we're talking about here. What Biden administration is saying, he says no ceasefire is possible until this policy of murder has worked, is sort of where he closes. It's just absurd to ask for a ceasefire. So what he's saying here is that there is no possibility of a ceasefire until this policy works. And I don't think he really means this, but if you follow that through, is like there's no ceasefire possible until the Gazans are eradicated, until there are no Palestinians left. Because if there are Palestinians alive after this, they are all, Hamas, the organization, the individuals, every individual in that can be wiped out. But if there are Palestinians left alive after this, violent resistance and retribution against Israel is going to be, I assume, the main focus of their lives going forward. And that's this idea that there was just no choice but to do anything other than this policy of mass murder is flatly insane. Flatly, I'm not the first person to say this, but it's directly Putin-like. It is directly Putin-like under a situation where Israel is under dramatically less threat. The threat to Israel was eradicated by October 11th, if not a couple days earlier. Israel will not take its eye off the Gaza border again, ever. That's it. That's the problem solved from the perspective of Israel's security. All this mass murder of the slave population is just utterly pointless.
How many people do you think worked on this article? Because I get the feeling there probably was a lot of very highly paid people brainstorming a long time over this.
I saw a theory that this was just Brett McGurk's article, maybe, or who's a ridiculously failed Middle East guru who has run Middle East policy for the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. Big winner, that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty good track record.
Yeah.
Pretty peaceful Middle East.
There's a little Munich in here just for fun. That's why our commitment is, we know from 2 world wars in the past century that when aggression in Europe goes unanswered, the crisis does not burn itself out. It draws America in directly. That's why our commitment to Ukraine today is an investment in our own security, prevents a broader conflict tomorrow. It's just like these platitudes that ring really, really, really hollow in an article that is designed to take resources away from Ukraine and devote them to bombing hospitals in Palestine.
Like, I feel it's okay to bring up world. I know a lot of like historians and stuff are very cynical when like the average Joe, brings up Nazis and World War II and stuff. But I think in this case you can criticize them because, how many people have spent time on this article and worked through it, but you got to stop them because Nazis.
Yeah, you got to
remember what happened, Hitler.
Got to throw Munich in there. It's just, yeah. What's also interesting, our allies in Asia are standing with us as well to support Ukraine and hold Putin accountable, because they understand that stability in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific are inherently connected.
Mm-hmm.
Are they?
Well, sadly, not really, no.
Well, they're connected because we are connecting it.
Oh, yeah.
Because we are forcing Japan and South Korea, which I believe Japan and South Korea are our only allies in Asia who have decided to make a big commitment.
I definitely say they're only full-fat allies. There's no doubt.
Yeah. But they're the only people in Asia who have committed to helping to protect Ukraine, and they have done so because those are the countries that are most invested in the United States coming to their aid in a plausible conflict with China. This is not some deep connection here. This is something that also
Korea has an incredible artillery stockpile and manufacturing facilities.
Which is incredibly useful for Ukraine. But
no, I don't think India or Vietnam really care.
No, and it's just like, again, the United States is creating these conflicts. Taiwan, Ukraine are great. Their independence is nice if it's cheap. We're not maintaining that stuff cheaply. Nor are we really maintaining it. Ukraine would be freer, more whole and independent had we not supported the overthrow of their democratically elected president in 2014. I think that Putin's subsequent actions make Putin the bad guy and us the good guys, but we made these choices. As recently as 2015, Xi Jinping was glad-handing the democratically elected president of Taiwan. It's the Trump and Biden presidencies that have made this conflict look much more possible and much more real. That is this enormous Washington, D.C. fraud, monstrous fraud that I've been talking about this past month or so. And it is, Biden looked like a guy who could maybe exert some influence from the American electorate and work against that, and he's just completely snowed over by it. And
could you see him acting different if his opinion polls were better?
Well, I think that's a question that goes back. I think at this point, that's hard to imagine. I think what is interesting to imagine is what if the military-industrial complex media hadn't gone after him so hard in the aftermath of Afghanistan? What if they had actually step back and be like, wow, I'm glad Biden got us out of there, because it's clear that the generals were lying to us for 20 years. And it looks like the generals refused to do what two democratically elected presidents had asked them to do, and create an orderly withdrawal from Afghanistan. And thanks Biden for doing that, or just not talked about it so much, and not destroyed his popularity. If they hadn't destroyed his popularity, would Biden have had more leeway to interact with Putin and say, hey, like, don't effing do this. Like, yeah, okay, how about we'll say that Zelensky's not, we'll say that Ukraine's definitely not going into NATO. We'll make some kind of commitment for that, and you can stand down, and we'll go back to the Minsk proceedings, and there would still be pretty inconclusive negotiations going on between two countries where 300,000 more people would be alive. That's an interesting question to me about like Biden's popularity ratings. The series of decisions made in the Middle East have just been so bad. The Abraham Accords, one of the greatest disappointments of the Biden administration, again, after that Afghanistan thing, that was a very good thing to do, is that he's pretty much just maintained Donald Trump's policies. The Abraham Accords, the Abraham Accords, the whole point of the Abraham Accords was like, oh, if we get Arab dictators to do deals with Israel, we can just ignore the Palestinians. We see how that worked out. And that mess was probably coming down the pike regardless. Though who knows, if Biden had actually not had to make his presidency about some weird resurrection of missionary zeal United States, maybe there would have been some oxygen left over to keep Netanyahu out of power. I think if Netanyahu wasn't in power, it's entirely possible that October 7th wouldn't have happened.
Why do you think Netanyahu is so popular in America?
In America, I think there's a lot of organizations that put a lot of effort into making him seem popular. And I think there's a fracturing by power. It's interesting. I wonder almost if the consensus, the pro-Israel consensus in the United States were stronger and more confident, frankly, then perhaps Netanyahu would have been sent packing a long time ago. Because that, if there was, the consensus were as strong as it used to be, people would actually be concerned about what's good for Israel, and would recognize that this grifter who's worked assiduously to make the conflict with the Palestinians worse for 15 years was not actually serving the Israeli people.
Israel's best interests.
Yeah, he was serving weapons companies in the United States. And I think because there's this real discomfort within the Democratic Party, Biden is a great example, the older echelons of the Democratic Party who miss this real closeness with Israel and are trying to maintain it within their own party. And then you've got the Republican Party that's like, Israel's ours now, and is like 100% for them. And then the upper level Democrats are trying to be for them. So there's just this sort of chaos that allows Netanyahu to come up and be like, who's my friend? And everybody just sort of is too busy being worried about, how do I feel about Israel? How does my party feel about Israel? Are we competing well, to feel good about Israel? That like nobody who cares about Israel is actually thinking about, oh God, this guy's a monster and a disaster for Israel. They're just sort of like, well, it's the Israeli PM. We don't have the energy to like dedicate to whatever he's about because we've got our own psychodrama about, do we like Israel? Do we not like Israel? I don't know if that made any sense, but I sort of wonder if that's the case.
Okay, so he's able to use sort of, they don't want to delve too deep into the whole Israeli politics, so they just sort of go with whoever's in charge.
Yeah, and I think there was a scope to delve deeper, like have more nuanced views of Israeli politics and how they were developing. But now it's just another sort of culture war cesspit. It is just American politics, just dumber, and with a whole bunch of really gross constraints that are largely done away with in the United States. I wrote here, fundamental fantasy. I think we talked about this probably enough, but just one more time. And while Israelis are still in shock and suffering the trauma of this attack, Hamas has promised that it will relentlessly try to repeat October 7th. It has said very clearly that it will not stop. It has been stopped. Like, the problem was not defending the border. The border is defended. Hamas has no scope to do this. The only set of circumstances under which Hamas could do this, again, would be if a full-on Hezbollah attack took place, and then in that context, perhaps Israeli resources would be so tapped that maybe they could get over the border again for another brief, 2-day rampage or something like that. And I think even that is very unlikely. And if that horrific scenario is your concern, then creating such a level of mass murder in Gaza that Hezbollah might feel compelled to jump in is not the right policy. But that's what they're doing. So anyway.
But is that not why the aircraft carriers are about, is to keep them in check?
Yes. They're just there to start a larger war for the United States in the Middle East that is not justified under any kind of authorization of military force. It's just a war that's going to start there. And yes, if Congress were asked, this Congress would say, go for it forever. Our goal should not be simply to stop the war for today. It should be to end the war forever, break the cycle of unceasing violence, and build something stronger in Gaza and across the Middle East so that history does not stop repeating itself. This is, okay, so this point on, I guess this is page 3, we get into just true obscenity here. I've mentioned the Abraham Accords, this idea that, we're going to do deals with the United States is going to make sacrifices so that Arab dictatorships will make deals with Israel, and that's going to mean we never have to think about the Palestinians. And it's just, this is why people think this was written by Brett McGurk, is that it is extraordinary considering the enormity, the horror of what's been unfolding, the fact that every Arab and Muslim country has sort of banded together to say, this is a horrific genocidal atrocity that is being committed in Israel. They're still pushing the Abraham Accords. Just weeks before October 7th, and the amazing thing is they're still pushing Benjamin Netanyahu. Just weeks before October 7th, I met in New York with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The main subject of the conversation was a set of substantial commitments that would help both Israel and the Palestinian territories better integrate into the broader Middle East. It is unreal that they're still pushing the Abraham Accords here. This Trump plan that is the strategic context within which October 7th happened, and they're still pushing it like it's viable, and they're still pushing Netanyahu, a guy that most Israelis want to see out of office and in jail as soon as this war is over.
Yeah, because I know that his party, is it Likud?
What, the Likud party?
Yeah, because they only have, 32 seats out of 120. It's a very small party at the minute. Has this helped them in the polls, or will they never see it?
Everybody hates. My understanding is that most people in Israel absolutely hate Netanyahu and believe that he is personally responsible for October 7th. I do think that as Netanyahu and Biden, with his hogwash about it's not going to stop unless we keep murdering children. Netanyahu and Biden are consciously creating this we must keep murdering, or every kibbutz in Israel is going to get rampaged through, which is frankly nonsense. Netanyahu wants to keep this war going. That's a really perverse incentive here, is that he has to keep that level of insecurity going, and would probably be happier if Hezbollah were to jump into the war and create a wider war with Iran, because the second the emergency is over, he's gone. Yeah, Netanyahu's way to extraordinary ability to hold on to power is, I think, conceded by most to be over when this war is over, which is why he will do everything in his power to keep this war going, and why it's so outrageous to see Biden helping him with that process.
Are there any parts that you like?
I mean, he says nice things, but he makes this stuff here. There's a set of things that he sort of declares, or none of them are going to happen. To start, the United States proposed some basic principles. To start, Gaza must never be used as a platform to terrorism. Then stop murdering babies. It's got to be a platform for terrorism, whether it's Hamas or your options at this point are more terrorism or genocide. Much of the Israeli government is being very explicit in saying we'd like genocide or ethnic cleansing. They need to be sent to new homes. And the United States needs to pay for them to be sent to new homes. which is quite extraordinary. A bipartisan group of Israeli politicians was able to write that as an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, can you
Incredible.
imagine, like, the Burmese government, like, writing you know what? You guys need to take the Rohingya off our hands. That's what
but
you do.
could you imagine Russia, saying, "Oh, you need to take all these Ukrainians. We don't want them."
That's it. Yeah, we don't want them. Yeah, that's exactly what this is. Specifically, Biden says this because to get any Arab person to return, any Arab leader return his phone calls, he has to say this: there must be no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. That's happening.
Yeah.
That's happening.
Missiles have a habit of doing that.
Yeah, 20,000 people have been murdered. Only a trickle of the heavily injured folks have been leaving for Egypt, but I think that trickle is going to become a flood as Israel continues to keep anybody from getting basic services in Gaza. Also, we're going to start seeing large-scale disease and starvation murder even more Palestinians. So, yeah, maybe there's, the Egyptians are never going to officially take any Palestinians from Gaza, but the Palestinians that are going to survive the winter are probably going to be taken into Egypt. No reoccupation, that's already happening, and there's no indication that that's ever going to stop. No siege or blockade, okay.
What?
And no reduction in territory. The territory is already in the process of being reduced. There's no other way to look at what the Israeli government is imposing on Gaza at this point. They've already cut the territory in half and said everybody needs to go below this line. That is reduction in territory. And after this war is over, the voices of Palestinian people and their aspirations must be at the center of post-crisis governance in Gaza. It sounds nice, but it's nonsense. Okay, there is something I do like here. The United States is prepared to take our own steps, including issuing visa bans against extremists attacking civilians in the West Bank. So this is the first concrete anti-settler action that the United States government has ever proposed. And that is significant. And a lot of those settlers are American citizens. So this is actually really potentially, this would have been a great thing to do 10, 15 years ago. At this point, it's barely a Band-Aid, and I highly doubt it will ever happen. But that is something in here that I like. I guess it's just so much in here that really, this was actually probably the most Vladimir Putin-like thing, I think, in the entire article. As long as Hamas clings to its ideology of destruction, a ceasefire is not peace. To Hamas's members, every ceasefire is time they exploit to rebuild their stockpile of rockets, reposition fighters, and restart the killing by attacking innocents again. An outcome that leaves Hamas in control of Gaza would once more perpetuate its hate and deny Palestinian civilians the chance to build something better for themselves. This is Putin saying, we're bombing the Ukrainians to save them from the Nazi Ukrainian government. That is exactly like that, except at least the Ukrainians have a real military and an ability to defend themselves.
Yeah.
So this is this is obscenity.
I think it's funny he then mentions that they have a 4-hour pause every day, which you could see as a 4-hour ceasefire.
I don't think that's accurate, frankly. I don't think those actually exist. But I think there's some question about what those are, how real those are. I know plenty of Palestinians have been killed on those humanitarian corridors, but also I think hundreds of thousands have been ethnically cleansed down those humanitarian corridors. So yay. Yeah, no, just I think it's as good a place as any to end it with that, like, purely Putin, like, we're gonna keep murdering these defenseless people until they stop being this fantasy bad guy that doesn't exist.
Do you think Biden would like this to end as soon as possible, or would he like it to keep going?
Oh, I don't think Biden personally is, like,
Benjamin Netanyahu
psyched about the utter destruction.
So he would like it to end sooner
US
rather than later?
Yeah, and I think that you can even make an argument. I don't think it is. I don't accept this argument, but I think what Biden would say, not in the context of an op-ed, but if he was sitting down with, Barack Obama, having a beer, he'd be like, "God damn Netanyahu, like, he's just got to stop doing this. But you got to understand, I got to hug him got to hug them to have any control at all, you know? And that's certainly the argument that's being put forward by the Biden administration staffers. But fuck that. Like, we murdered at least 5,000 children last month. We murdered at least 5,000. Like, it's just, oh yeah, this is how I want it to end. We can't stand by when hate rears its head. We murdered 5,000 children last month. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of hate and bias. We murdered 5,000 children last month. We must renounce violence and vitriol and see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. We murdered 5,000 children last month. Like, it is unbelievable. Just anyway, I think I've made my feelings rather clear on this one, Rory.
I think you need to calm down and talk about debt.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll do next time.
We'll have a much more exciting episode next time.
Well, yeah, exciting might oversell it, but I think I'll get less angry. Hopefully I'll get less angry. Joe Biden.
Thank you very much for listening. What's
Joe Biden? I'm done with him. Let's talk about Newsom. Let's talk about Shapiro. Let's talk about Bashir. Let's talk about
literally
Whitmer.
Anyone else.
Anybody else. And let's do it now so we don't have to do it in June when he falls down the stairs.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.